Welcome back to Autarky. Today we are diving deep into a topic that's been shaping headlines across the globe. It's a story of geography, hubris, and the cold hard reality of power. For decades, Europe seemed convinced that globalization and the soft touch of diplomacy had made the old prize fight of history obsolete. It was a pleasant delusion, certainly, a kind of extended holiday from history, if you will, while other major powers like the US, Russia, and China remained acutely focused on territory, resources, and influence. While Europe was busy articulating grand visions of a borderless future, others were busy shoring up their geographic advantages, constructing both physical and ideological walls. Even as far back as 2009, the Atlanticist sentiment began to wane, replaced by a growing internal neutralism. The continent's proud boast from 2003 that Europe was secure and free now rings distinctly hollow in a vastly deteriorating global security landscape. This isn't to say Europe hasn't tried to address its defense shortcomings. Quite the opposite, in fact. The continent has excelled in one particular area, creating an alphabet soup of security mechanisms: OESDP, PESCO, EDF, CARD, you name it, there's an acronym for it. But these elaborate frameworks, unfortunately, have largely failed to produce any tangible shift in real readiness. Since 1999, Europe's military capabilities have seen a staggering reduction, in some areas by as much as 30 to 80%. The EU today possesses only about 30% of the actual capacity required to meet its own stated military ambitions. Its armies, analysts wryly note, often resemble bonsai armies, perfectly formed, aesthetically pleasing in miniature, but lacking the critical mass for any high-end, full-spectrum conflict. At the heart of this predicament, as thinkers like Tim Marshall often point out, lies geography. It's written in the very soil. The fundamental difference between why the 50 American states coalesce into one unified nation, while Europe's sovereign states maintain identities far stronger than any allegiance to the broader European project. And then there's the Great European Plain, a vast flat corridor that has historically, and quite inconveniently, invited invasion from the east for centuries. Russia, viewing this topography through the lens of deep insecurity, has consistently sought to control vital buffer zones like Ukraine and Belarus. Europe, meanwhile, remains strategically divided, unable to even agree on who or what precisely to defend, let alone how. Perhaps the ultimate, most embarrassing proof of European irrelevance is unfolding right on its geographic doorstep: Greenland. This isn't just a large icy island, it's a critical strategic linchpin. It forms the eastern anchor of the Greenland-Iceland United Kingdom, or Gayuk Gap, a crucial maritime choke point for tracking Russian naval movements. Despite Greenland's clear status as part of the Kingdom of Denmark, the European Arctic nations have consistently failed to articulate a compelling long-term vision for the region. This strategic vacuum has exposed the island to what can only be described as predatory bargaining by the US, Russia, and China. The US, particularly, now views Greenland through a variant of the Monroe Doctrine, treating it as part of its near abroad, a region where Washington, not Copenhagen or Brussels, ultimately decides what happens. While European leaders might issue statements on sovereignty, the reality is stark. There's only one outcome if the US decides to apply force. Denmark, in a telling concession, has been forced into expensive commitments, like promising billions for US-made F-35s and surveillance aircraft, just to satisfy the American demand. If you're finding this analysis valuable, consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. It helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss our deep dives into global affairs. Now, let's consider the Arctic itself, a region where climate change is quite literally and figuratively heating things up. The melting ice is breaking the geographic prison that once restricted movement, opening up previously unthinkable shipping lanes. The Northern Sea route and the Transpolar route, for instance, could slash shipping times between Europe and Asia by as much as 40%. This dramatic shift is transforming the Arctic into an arena of fierce competition. Yet, once again, the EU seems content to remain a bystander. Characterized as a geopolitical dwarf that is over-institutionalized, under-equipped, and strategically divided, Europe watches from the sidelines as great powers position themselves for maritime dominance and resource exploitation. It's a prime example of failing to grasp a new geographic reality. And then we have the topographical trap of Eastern Europe. Marshall's observations on the vulnerability of the great European plain are especially pertinent here. The flatlands of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, for instance, are notoriously hard to defend. This region offers nowhere to retreat to and proves incredibly hard to reinforce should a serious threat materialize. Despite these obvious geographic vulnerabilities, European member states remain, charitably speaking, unable or unwilling to fill the gap left by any potential American disengagement. Analysts estimate that Europe currently possesses only about 30% of the capacities required to fulfill its own military ambitions in such a challenging landscape. It's a classic case of having grand aspirations without the practical means to back them up. Instead of projecting power outward, shaping the world around it, Europe appears to be retreating into a defensive ring, a sort of fortress Europe. The focus has notably shifted from supporting global governance to tackling the symptoms of international instability. We see the EU increasingly preoccupied with issues like migration and crime, rather than addressing the deeper geographic and political drivers behind these shifts. Agencies like Frontex, Europe's border guard force, are steadily displacing traditional military deployments. This signals a profound shift. Europe increasingly acts as a glorified border guard for its own continent, rather than a decisive global strategic player. In essence, Europe stands today as a wealthy spectator at the geopolitical chess match. It is, by most accounts, over-institutionalized, under-equipped, and strategically divided. A continent of immense economic wealth, yet one that seems to possess only the will to write weak declarations of condemnation, while its powerful neighbors, the US, Russia, and China, aggressively move their pieces and ultimately decide how the game is run. That's all for today's analysis. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay informed and stay curious.